We're going to talk about 20 cuisines today. British families used to depend on to stay long before thermostats and other things that keep you warm radiators took over. When winter came over the nation, as frost crept up the kitchen became inside of windows. The only room that really came to life. Chilly the stoves hissed and the kettles rattled on the fragrance of something gently coming up from the hob cooking brought the kind of comfort that blankets do. Never could. Food wasn't only food. It was heating you up. Could eat. Not many meals showed that better than stew, the engine that never fails warmth of the working class. Almost every house had a version bubbling away that was heavy with potatoes, carrots, onions, and other things pieces of beef that a household could spare. It can start as broth on Monday and end up by Wednesday. It will be a thick stew with gravy, getting thicker every night. Reports from the National Food Survey in 1950 to lamb stew on 80% of winter menus, at least on Northern England's cuisine, twice a week. It cost a few cents per providing and filling small areas with steam that made the windows foggy and thawed fingers that are frozen. For people who live close to the coast, warmth typically came from fish pie, with a creamy white sauce on top, golden coating of mashed potatoes full with smoked haddock or any other cut of fish going cheap. In Aberdeen and Hull, the smokehouses themselves became local heaters. Men stood in line for packages of hot fish while breathing among clouds of oak's air that smells good. In 1957, families spent around 2 pence for every pound of smoked haddock, which costs half as much as fresh cod, changing preservation into comfort. When Bubble and Squeak kept going even while wages were low. Heated plates, cabbage and potatoes that were left over, and beef were mixed together and cooked till they are crisp, the pan making the hiss that made the dish its name. Though the fragrance spread through the streets of the terrace, letting neighbors know about another day people were getting warmth from yesterday's pieces. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough. No winter table felt right sans sweat pudding, which is thick a hot brick of food. Wives put it in cloth and hanged it over boiling water and letting it sit for hours while condensation ran down the tiles. When the fabric came loose, the room was filled with a fog of steam, and the glasses fogged up right away. If filled with ground meat, onions, or spooned with jam for a Sunday treat, perspiration pudding turned inexpensive flour and fat into energy that was stored. Records from 1951 show more than 70 million pounds of sweat sold. Most of it is eaten between from October to March, pulled into the hole. Served the same to purposes, feeding families while keeping the house warm. Cooked sausages in batter till the edges rose high and turned dark. The oven is buzzing for over an hour and blowing warm air in every nook and cranny. One tray fed 6 for less than 3 shillings in 1950 for grocer ledgers. Kids waited with plates ready, cheeks red from standing too near the door of the open oven. In towns for mining and shipbuilding, pea soup was the real central heating. Break up soaked peas overnight, then simmered with a pork bone until they become anything like broth and paste. Families in the Northeast ate more dried peas per person than anywhere else, roughly a half-pound a week for each person by 1953. The effect was a rich yellow warmth that stuck to the spoon. By the time daylight came, the leftovers turned into pea pudding, cut cold for sandwiches that are still brought back yesterday's heat. Bread and dripping filled in the spaces when nothing else could. Wouldn't. After the roast on Sunday, every drop of rendered fat was poured into a tin and put it next to the stove, half sturdy and waiting. Spread on thick bread, added salt to it, which made it more calories than typical breakfasts today. The Ministry of Food thought in 1950 that about 25% of working-class breakfasts in industrial towns still depended on soaking. It wasn't classy, but it was a way to stay alive. Then came shepherd's pie, which is a miracle that made half a pound of mince into a whole family's meal. A piece of lamb or beef from Sunday dinner was ground up and combined with gravy and onions, then with brown mashed potatoes on top under the grill. The oven did double duty again, cooking dinner while heating duties again, making dinner and heating it up the hall. A study from 1961 ranked shepherd's pie as one of the top 3 in Britain. Meals on weekdays made once a week into thirds of working-class families during the coldest months. As ovens worked extra hours all across in Britain, every home had its unique recipe to stay warm. When frost covered the panes and breath was visible in the air, rice sweet pudding appeared on the stovetops. And slowly, nutmeg, sugar, and milk turned into something that made steam like a little thing against a child's face, a heater in a bowl. In the 1950s, milk gave almost a quarter of the country's calories, and rice pudding stretched every drop more. School canteens served it by the gallon, and the skin that grew on top became one of the easiest luxuries of winter. For those lucky enough to be able to buy a few slices of hot soup, and lamb were the main dishes. Skinny there were layers of beef, onions, and potatoes, then baked for hours in a low oven till the edges turned brown. Families in Lancashire alone went through around 100,000 tons of potatoes each year in this shape. It wasn't just dinner. The fragrance told the street what was going on. The work for the day was done. Factory the whistles ceased, but from every door drifted the thicker smoke of food prepared at home heat, proving that even before heating, Britain had already learned the skill of keeping each other warm. As the evenings got longer and the wind blew via chimneys, meals got smaller, more about how long it lasts than how good it tastes. The goal wasn't just to eat, but to remain warm until the next day. Every home had its own tricks. Dumplings floating in stew, glasses of cocoa that were so thick that made the windows foggy, and the pudding stuck to the ribs till the fire went out. Some of the cheapest and most filling were small, thick packages of minced pork, liver, and onions held together by gravy and breadcrumbs. They used the ripped-up pieces that no one else wanted and turned them into something salty, rich, and sustaining. In Birmingham and the Black Country, stores were as common as in the country. Stores were as frequent as chip stands through the 1950s, selling thousands of them each week for threepence a part. The brown gravy bubbled in the metal trays, the fragrance going down on the street. They weren't fancy, yet they kept men who worked on their feet through the chilly, nasty weather. When there wasn't enough meat, dumplings took its place. Made of flour, suet, and a little bit of water, they grew bigger in the stew until they were tender and a lot. Housewives just dropped them in before serving, sealing in the last of the heat that made all the windows foggy pain. A pound of flour at 3 cents could feed a household for days, and no one thought about it when the pot was more dumpling than meat, than beef. They were in towns in the north. More of a ceremony than a recipe promised that dinner will follow the cool from every room. Not all comfort came from the kitchen. Some came from a cup. Cocoa terminated many British days. Before there was central heating. Thick, a little bitter, and often prepared with it was so hot that the milk got diluted down, that spoons were standing up. In the 1950s, Cadbury sold almost 25,000 tons of cocoa powder a year, and a lot of it was measured by hand from paper packages. For kids, it was time to go to bed. For parents, it represented peace, like a curfew in a cup. Calmness that feels warm. For actual lasting strength, black was the best pudding. Dark, iron, rich, and a little bit hot. It made folks hot who worked outside. Lancashire and Yorkshire led the way, with just Barry's market making more than £2 million of every year by the early 1960s. A single slice of fried bread next to eggs or potatoes could provide a worker energy to work through the cold. The smell was earthy and smoky, like a second draped over the streets in the north weather like this. Marrow bone soup gave warmth to people who couldn't even afford that. Butchers often threw bones in for free to loyal customers, and housewives cooked them with onions and simmered them for hours. Carrots until the broth got murky and thick. It cooled down overnight, set hard like jelly, ready to be cut and warmed up the next day. The Ministry of Food dubbed it a meal that makes its own blanket. And they weren't not right. When all the meat was gone, the pan was full of potato hash. Families' potatoes cut into cubes with onions, carrots, and each piece of bacon skin they could locate. When you fried them together, they became a sizzling a lot of warmth that filled the kitchen with steam and a hint of onion smell and fat. 4p a pound for potatoes into the 50s, which made them the least expensive way to fill up. In Manchester, enamel bowls were very hot. They had to be held with a cloth. The fragrance of fried onions meant one thing. It was freezing outdoors, but not in here. Dinner was sometimes as easy as oatmeal. Boil oats in water, sweetened with tulle and served hot produced a slow burning warmth that persisted the night. In Scotland, there are leftovers. Porridge was put into drawers to cool, then cut into pieces for the next day's work. Work for the day. A pound of oats costs tuppence. Were food for survival, stable and reliable, and always there. A teaspoon of warmth that didn't go away when you stopped eating. When sugar and spice could be saved, bread pudding turned into leftovers into luxury. bread that has gone bad and saturated in milk, combined with sultanas and cooked till with a caramel crust. Families kept the crusts every week. We look forward to Saturday pudding night. Numbers from the 1955 National Food Survey put it on a list of the most common home-baked pastries that come out every week in 6 out of 10 houses of working-class people. The fragrance of syrup, fruit, and coal smoke could raise a whole street when they worked together. For people with stronger stomachs, tripe and onions stayed the same in the North fallback. The unique stomach with honeycomb, it's simmered for hours with sweet onions until they are soft. In the 1950s, there are more than 200 tripe stores in Manchester, kept the tradition going by selling it for 4 pence for a pound. Older guys swore by it. The younger ones held their noses. Still, in dwellings that didn't have heat, a bowl eating tripe and onion gravy equaled the distinction between shaking and asleep. The real fun happened at week's end finish with steaming sponge pudding, the crown of winter coziness. Whether gold syrup troll or just plain sweet sponge with it had to be steamed because the jam was hiding underneath. Gently for 2 hours while the air cooled came together on the ceiling. The lid shook. Gently, a lullaby for kids who are hungry. The pudding finally came out, and the crust shone like amber, and the house smelled nice. By the late 1960s, convenience started to creep in. Soups in powder form, pies in packets, etc. Instant gravies promised to keep you toasty in minutes, but not many families thought they were the gradual, persistent heat of something created at home. Even after electric, many mothers still left after the heaters came. The oven door was open after baking, the final bit of borrowed warmth before bed. In those peaceful times, the kitchen was owned by everyone. A dad stacked the final bits of coal. A mother mixed the porridge for tomorrow in its pan, and kids warmed their hands up against the door of the oven is open. Frost outside made the windows look silver, yet inside there was a glow, not the kind that emanated not from electricity or oil, but from the oldest type of heat. Something was made, shared, and consumed together. Since before there were radiators and thermostats, warmth came from the same area as dinner, from the center of the house, and from the food that wouldn't let the cold win. Frost still creeped in by the early 1970s. Through windows and pipes in the bedroom, grumbled all night long. Even though newer heating systems started to hum in modern homes, most families still depended on the same comfort they always had, the warmth of something being cooked. Kitchens shone long after dinner was ended, the remaining bits of coal and doors of the oven open, keeping houses alive until the morning. One dish that was always on British tables was corned beef hash. Few meals said more list of winters for the working class. Cut corned beef cooked with potatoes and onions made can beef taste better, golden and full. The metallic taste, the fragrance made that can disappear, of onions that are frying. Britain in 1953 brought in more than 200,000 tons of corned meat from Australia and Argentina, most of it going to hash or sandwiches. It costs little over 2 shillings per pound. Was a reliable meal for families without refrigerators. Protein that was waiting patiently on a shelf for the next chilly night. Spam was another thing that survived privation. Fritters, a military invention that stuck for decades. They were sold at chip shops by the million in the early 1950s. Battered and fried pieces of pink flesh until the edges broke. Spam cost 2 shillings a tin, which was a taste of comfort for half the price of beef. The smell of heated oil and salt drifted around the streets, wearing coats and scarves taking in the fragrance. Even after there were still queues when rationing ceased. Not outside Chippies on Friday nights, for style, but for the warmth of a new paper package in freezing hands. When there wasn't enough fresh meat, Cowhill stew filled the space. Taken from the lower leg, Cowhill didn't look like a good place for cattle, but it got thick when it simmered slowly. Broth that was gelatinous and filled the terrace homes with steam. At 6 pence for every pound, it was the least expensive protein a butcher could sell. In Manchester, Birmingham, and Glasgow, its sluggish bubble on the hob was the fragrance of terrible times, the background music much more valuable than it costs. Liver and onions divided families in half. Fried rapidly and covered in gravy, it flooded kitchens with a smell that was distinct, the smell of iron and onions. During rationing, ale got away with most limitations, and families learned to trust it. Ale still made up by 1950 to 15% of all the beef eaten in Britain. Kids might have whined, but mothers know better. It was a lunch that kept bones strong even when it was chilly. Steak and kidney came on Sundays. Pudding, the weighty work of art of warmth of the working class. Cheap pieces of chuck steak and kidney were trapped within a delicious crust and simmered for hours until the gravy made the pastry inflate. The lid rattled and the sound of its slowly patient bubbling became a feature of Sunday in Britain. Almost 3 million people in the early 1950s every week, families baked puddings like this. Proof that being frugal could still feel party. Peas are grown in the Northeast. Pudding and Savoy sausages stayed an everyday anchor. The thick golden paste of cooked split peas for hours next to the brilliant crimson of the pork bone met Savoys to make a dish that is good for those who work in mines and build ships. In the middle of the 1950s, Durham and Northland were in charge of the countries in eating peas, almost 12 per home every week. The scent, the smell was smoky, salty, and sweet, of staying alive in locations where winters stretched the longest. As Britain got bigger interested in the world outside of their own, even convenience started to look strange. Vesta dinners, which started in 1961, offered dehydrated curry, choween, or pela in thin cardboard boxes. For a lot of kids, those bright packets meant a new adventure. The first taste of an unfamiliar flavor in a decade that would have been gray otherwise. Sales hit their highest point at $15 million a year from 1968 to 1972. The food might not have tasted good, but the promise felt warm, which was new to break up the stew's sameness. Then came Smash Instant Mash, the powder that does miracles of 1969. Housewives splashed hot water over granules and agitated until pale clouds formed turned into mash. For 1 shilling and 8 cents a packet, it was inexpensive, quick, and clean. The naughty Martians made fun of anyone who still peeled real potatoes, and by the middle of the 1970s, 50 million boxes had been sold every year. But no one ever said it was comforting. It was warm because of what they were told, not because of how they felt. Welch rarebit preserved the traditional ways alive. Cheddar from the ration era was used to make it, mustard and a little beer. It turned basic bread into something that smells good and sharp. From 1941 to 1954, the government most folks only knew cheddar cheese. New, limited to 2 or 3 ounces per week. Families grated every last bit, learning to stretch flavor the same way they pulled on coal. A tray of uncommon bits easily warm up a kitchen beneath the grill quicker than any heater. Even veggies took on the heat. Root turnips, Swedes, and vegetable bakes cooked along with carrots and pulses with a piece of bacon that shone gold in trays made of enamel. In the early 1950s, the Ministry of Food's pamphlets told households should eat more vegetables when meat was scarce. Not very much. The fragrance of caramelized Swede, the bacon that dripped, filled the narrow kitchens, which reminded everyone to be frugal still had its fun. When electric heaters first came out buzzing in living rooms, the time of cooking for warmth was going out of style. But some rituals never went away. Mothers still left the door of the oven open after baking, letting the heat spills into the frigid passageways. Fathers still piled on extra potatoes for the cook-up for tomorrow. Even with heaters, families naturally moved toward the kitchen, which is the real heart of the home. Because heat wasn't merely about being comfortable, it was about being close. The shared room, the shared dinner, and the shared steam rising from the same pot. The smell of onions cooking, the sound of a kettle hissing, the sound of a spoon through the skin of the pudding. These were the sounds that Britain's first heaters brought families together when it was cold, pushed up to the glass. Britain learned before central heating to cook warmth into its bones. 1 stew, 1 pudding, and 1 steamy mug at a time. And even if the fires are out, the radiators hum softly now, and every fragrance of gravy or a sizzling saucepan still has the same truth. A house that stays together by love, by hunger, and by heat.